Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
I used to think there were certain moments in life that were immune to chaos. Birthdays, funerals, Christmas Eve, around mom's overcooked ham. But engagement dinners? Engagement dinners were supposed to be safe. A space where everyone dressed up, played nice, and tried not to talk politics for once. That night, I'd shown up a little late, wearing a navy blue dress that used to belong to my ex's mother. Yes, still in my closet, go ahead and judge. But I'd paired it with new earrings and a forced smile, ready to celebrate my little brother finding the one. Or at least what we all thought was the one. The restaurant was one of those upscale downtown spots that tried a little too hard. Dim lighting, exposed brick, charcuterie boards that looked more like high-end Lego sets than actual food. But it made my mom happy. She loved feeling cultured. My brother Jason was sitting at the head of the table, beaming with that kind of naive confidence only people under 30 can pull off without sounding delusional. And beside him sat her Melanie. A pretty little thing, perfectly manicured, soft-spoken, all lace and grace. I had only met her twice before, and both times I'd gotten the same feeling you get when you accidentally drink milk past the expiration date. Fine at first, then something just feels off. The drinks flowed fast, as they always do at family gatherings. I'd barely taken my second sip of Pinot when Melanie raised her glass and, with that syrupy sweet southern drawl of hers, said, "We're so excited to start a family. It just feels right, you know?" I nodded, ready to raise my glass in agreement, a toast forming in the back of my throat, something generic about love and commitment. But then she leaned in close, so close I could smell her perfume, something sugary and faintly artificial, and she whispered into my ear with a softness that didn't match her words at all. "By the way, you should really get tested too." The fork slipped from my fingers, bounced once against the edge of the table, and hit the floor with a clang that felt much louder than it probably was. I sat frozen, blood rushing to my ears, trying to process what she'd just said. I turned to her, expecting maybe a wink or a smirk, some sign that it was a joke, an awful, inappropriate joke, but she had already turned back to Jason, giggling about something he'd said like she hadn't just tossed a live grenade into my brain. And here's where the real mindbender began. What the hell did she mean by that? Get tested for what? STDs? Was she implying she and I had shared someone? Was this about my ex Ben? Because that would make no damn sense. Except suddenly, it did. My breakup with Ben hadn't made sense, not really. After almost 6 years together, he'd just said he didn't feel it anymore and moved out within the week. No drama, no screaming, just gone. The kind of exit that, in hindsight, only happens when someone's already packed their bags emotionally and just waiting for the logistics to line up. My chest tightened. Melanie had barely known Jason for a year, and now she was sitting here, talking about babies and family and whispering cryptic warnings like we were in a goddamn spy movie. I picked up my fork slowly, forced a bite of salmon down my throat, and smiled like I wasn't seconds away from standing up and flipping the table. Later that night, after hugs and polite lies were exchanged, "We have to do this again soon. You two are perfect together." I got into my car and sat in silence for a full 10 minutes. I didn't even start the engine. I just stared ahead, hands on the steering wheel, replaying her voice in my head. "You should really get tested too." The way she said it wasn't a suggestion, it was a threat. Or worse, it was a revelation. Now let me ask you something. What would you have done? If you were in my shoes, hearing that at your own brother's engagement dinner, would you confront her, tell your brother, pretend it never happened? Because here's the thing. I thought I was going to take the high road. I really did. I drove home, made tea, told myself I'd sleep on it. But some truths don't let you sleep. Some whispers crack your whole damn world open. That night, I didn't just lose sleep. I started losing parts of myself. And I didn't even know yet how deep this rabbit hole would go. Not even close. The next morning didn't feel like morning at all. it felt like being yanked from a shallow grave. Not by sunlight, but by the intrusive buzz of my phone and the uneasy aftertaste of questions I hadn't asked aloud. The air in my bedroom was stale, despite the cracked window, and the silence in my apartment pressed against my eardrums like a verdict I wasn't ready to hear. I sat at the edge of the bed, hair tangled, shirt creased, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of the television, the only thing in the room that didn't seem unsettled. I hadn't slept so much as collapsed, too wired and too exhausted at once. The weight of Melanie's whisper still coiled tight around my chest like barbed wire. The first thing I did, after a long shower and a cup of lukewarm coffee that tasted like cardboard, was dig out my old phone, my Ben phone, as I called it now, the one that still had his texts, photos, those useless half-assed promises he used to send at midnight when he couldn't sleep, and remembered briefly that I existed. I scrolled back through our last few months together, looking for something, anything that would justify the knot forming in my stomach. And it didn't take long to notice the gaps. There were entire weekends where his texts were dry, curt, sometimes non-existent, chalked up back then to work stress or phone dying, or occasionally, the classic, just needed some time to think. But now I looked at them differently. Now, every silence felt suspicious, every delay a potential lie, and every line of text looked like it had been written with someone else's fingers on his thigh. I couldn't prove anything yet, not really, but the seed was already planted, and my gut was telling me something I didn't want to believe, that Melanie's whisper wasn't a mistake. It was a message, and if I wanted answers, I had to go back, not just through texts or memories, but into the timeline itself. I made a list, old school pen and paper, one column for when I was with Ben, another for when Jason said he met Melanie. It was simple math, but math rarely lies. People do. According to Jason, he met Melanie at a friend's birthday party in Miami. That was last September. I still remember the day because it was the same weekend I'd gone upstate alone to a cabin we'd booked together, but Ben canceled last minute, claiming a sudden work trip to Chicago. I hadn't even argued then. I was so used to his absences by that point, they'd stopped stinging. But now it made me think, if Ben wasn't in Chicago and Jason was in Miami and Melanie just so happened to be there too, what were the chances all three stories aligned by coincidence? I needed more than assumptions. I needed facts. And that's where Nina came in. Nina had always been our mutual friend, mine and Ben's. And even though we drifted after the breakup, she was still someone who knew where the bodies were buried, figuratively speaking. She answered on the second ring, and after 5 minutes of small talk that felt like chewing broken glass, I cut to the chase. Did you see Ben in Miami last fall? There was a pause on her end, not long enough to pretend she didn't hear me, but just long enough to confirm guilt. She didn't say much, just that she remembered seeing him around, that he popped up at the party for a day, and that he seemed off. When I asked if he was with anyone, she said, I don't know, maybe. There was a girl, blonde, kind of southern, real flirty. And that's when my skin went cold. Melanie. It had to be her. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the dots weren't even trying to stay apart anymore. They were connecting themselves. That night, I called Ben. I didn't text because I wanted to hear his voice. I needed to hear the tone, the cracks, the lies tumble out in real time. He sounded surprised, polite, maybe a little too careful. When I asked about Miami, he said he didn't remember much. Just a quick weekend, nothing memorable. I asked if he'd met anyone new around that time, and he paused just a beat too long before saying, Not really, why? That's when I said it, soft but sharp. Because my brother's fiancée whispered something to me last night. Something about getting tested. Silence. Thick, dense, damning silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost defeated. You should have just let it go, he said, not angry, not apologetic, just resigned. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I didn't ask what it was, I didn't have to. The subtext was loud enough to rattle the windows. I ended the call without saying goodbye, and stared at the phone like it had just coughed up poison. That's when it became real. Not suspicion, not theory. Something had happened. Something involving Ben and Melanie. Something they thought they'd buried deep enough that I'd never stumble across it. And now, as I sat there in the dark, with the city lights flickering against the window and my stomach turning over itself, I realized something worse. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about betrayal or heartbreak. This was about my brother. And if Melanie had slept with Ben before, or worse, if they were still in touch, then I was sitting on a truth that could blow his world apart. But part of me wasn't ready to tell him. Not yet. Not until I knew everything. Because if I was going to break his heart, I needed to make sure the wound went clean through. Not because I was cruel, but because half-truths leave room for hope, and hope, in the face of betrayal, is just another kind of lie. For the next several days, I moved through my life like someone pretending to be alive, showing up to work on time, answering emails with the right amount of exclamation marks, smiling when the barista asked if I wanted oat milk instead of whole, and nodding along when my neighbor mentioned something about the weather shifting. It was all background noise, an elaborate theater of normalcy I maintained while my mind spun like a centrifuge, separating memory from suspicion, truth from trauma, trying to piece together a reality that had clearly been manipulated long before I had even begun asking questions. There's something uniquely cruel about discovering betrayal, not in a heated confession or an impulsive scream, but in the quiet, casual cruelty of a whisper dropped at a dinner table, something so seemingly small that it might have gone unnoticed had I not been listening so damn closely. But I was listening now, and not just to what people were saying. I started listening to what they weren't saying. Jason, for example, was calling me more often, not in a panicked or overtly suspicious way, but with that sort of innocent nervousness that only someone who doesn't yet know the walls are closing in can muster. He'd ask me if I was okay, if I was coming to the family brunch this Sunday, and each time he brought up Melanie, his voice carried a kind of manufactured joy, like he was trying to convince himself of something by repeating it often enough. I agreed to brunch, but not because I missed my family or wanted to play nice. I went because I needed to see her again. Melanie. I needed to look into those green eyes, framed by fake lashes and years of practiced sweetness, and I needed to smile while imagining how it would feel to watch her perfect little world unravel one carefully pulled thread at a time. I needed her to believe I wasn't onto her. Not yet. That Sunday, I arrived early, armed with a blueberry tart from the overpriced bakery near my place. Because nothing says, I'm not plotting your emotional demise, like bringing dessert. Mom hugged me too tightly, Dad grunted in approval at the sight of baked goods. And Jason, poor stupid Jason, looked like a kid who had just been given permission to believe in Santa Claus again. And then she walked in. Melanie. Wearing white, of course. Some lacy floral thing that probably cost more than my rent. And she smiled at me with that exact same sweetness as the night of the dinner. Not a crack in sight. I waited until the second cup of coffee and the third mention of venue deposits before I casually suggested that Melanie and I go for a walk around the block to catch up. She hesitated only slightly before agreeing, and I knew that meant something. People who have nothing to hide don't pause when offered fresh air. As we stepped outside, I could feel the tension between us like a second skin, too thin to see but too thick to ignore. We talked about dresses, about floral arrangements, and then I pivoted, sharp and sudden, asking if she and Jason were planning to honeymoon in Miami. The flicker in her eyes was brief, but it was there. Recognition, memory, maybe even guilt. You've been, right? I asked, keeping my voice light. Jason said you met at a birthday party down there. She nodded slowly and then said, Yeah, I think it was September. Funny night, I don't even remember most of it. But the way she said it told me everything. She remembered all of it. I let the silence stretch, let her stew in it. And then I said so casually it could have been mistaken for a joke, It's weird, that's the same weekend Ben was supposedly in Chicago. Small world. And just like that, the smile faltered. Not completely, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I saw it. The corners of her mouth twitching, the muscle in her jaw tensing. The rest of the walk was quiet, and when we returned to the apartment, I could feel her watching me, assessing whether I was bluffing or truly knew something. I said my goodbyes early, claiming work, and left with my heart racing. Not out of fear, but adrenaline. I was close now, too close for her to keep calm forever. And just as I got to my car, I saw it. Jason's old tablet, tucked beneath the passenger seat, the one he used to lend me when I needed to stream shows at Mom's. A thought hit me. Jason had given that to Melanie a few months ago when her laptop died. He probably didn't even remember. I slid it out, turned it on, and to my surprise, it wasn't locked. A few clicks in and I was staring at a folder labeled Photos Wedding Inspo. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that, but I did. Mixed in with Pinterest screenshots and bridal bouquets were 3 photos that didn't belong. One of Melanie in a bathrobe, I recognized as Ben's. One of a takeout container from a sushi place that was right across the street from Ben's apartment. And one selfie taken in what could only be his bedroom. Same lamp, same navy sheets. Dated 1 week before our breakup. I stared at that photo for a full 5 minutes, not even breathing, as the entire weight of it sank into my chest like wet cement. I had proof now. Not just suspicion, not just whispers and timelines and gut feelings. Actual, tangible proof that the woman my brother was about to marry had been in bed, quite literally, with the man who had shattered me. But it wasn't the betrayal that crushed me most. It was the calculation. The quiet, deliberate confidence that she could bury this deep enough that it would never rise again. That I'd stay silent, either out of fear or love or cowardice. But I wasn't staying silent anymore. I was done being the one left in the dark. Done playing the role of the good sister, the mature ex, the understanding adult. If she wanted to play dirty, she'd pick the wrong woman to underestimate. Because this time, I wasn't just coming for the truth. I was coming to make sure it burned. In the days that followed, I existed in a state of tightly coiled anticipation, like the moment right before a storm hits, when the air thickens and the sky bruises, and everyone pretends not to notice that the world is about to change. I went to work, answered phone calls, watered my plants, and even helped my mother choose napkin colors for the reception, all the while knowing that soon, very soon, the illusion they had so delicately built around Jason's engagement would be peeled back like cheap wallpaper, revealing the moldy, rotting truth underneath. There's something almost pleasurable about revenge when it's earned. When you didn't go looking for blood, but someone else handed you the knife and dared you to use it. The plan came together slowly, deliberately, like a puzzle with pieces that kept showing up at the exact right time, almost as if fate had gotten tired of watching me play nice. I didn't want to destroy her in private. That would be too easy, too quiet, and entirely too merciful. No, I wanted the lie to collapse in front of everyone, in a room full of people wearing suits and smiles, sipping champagne and talking about love, while the truth came spilling out like red wine on a white tablecloth. Impossible to ignore, impossible to clean. The bridal shower was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon in a country club that Melanie's mother had insisted on booking, a place with chandeliers too large for the rooms they were in, servers who looked like they hated every guest, and a string quartet playing music no one actually wanted to hear. I arrived late, deliberately so, and stepped in just as the speeches were winding down, feigning embarrassment and offering apologies with a smile that, I'm sure, didn't quite reach my eyes. Melanie looked radiant, of course, all dewy skin and practiced modesty, and Jason stood behind her with a look on his face that made my stomach twist with both pity and disgust. I'd prepared a speech, one that was just the right mix of sentimentality and subtext. Because the trick to good revenge isn't screaming the truth, it's letting it drip slowly so every person in the room has no choice but to follow the trail you're leaving behind. I raised my glass and began with the usual. How happy I was for them. How beautiful Melanie looked. How Jason had always been the kind of man who deserved something rare and honest. And then, as casually as if I were commenting on the weather, I said, "It's funny, how life brings people together. I mean, imagine the odds that Melanie would end up engaged to Jason after spending such intimate time with Ben. Small world, isn't it?" There was a pause, that perfect golden pause, where time itself seems to trip over its own feet. The silence was electric. I watched Melanie's face twitch, not dramatically, not enough to fall apart completely, but just enough for the mask to slip. And then came the murmurs, the confused looks, the quiet gasps from women clutching pearls they weren't actually wearing. Jason stared at me, blinking, his mind trying to catch up with the sentence I had just said, like someone watching a house burn, and only then realizing they're standing in the living room. Melanie, ever the actress, laughed. A brittle, too loud laugh that made a few people chuckle just because they didn't know what else to do. "Oh my God, what are you talking about?" she said. Eyes wide and shimmering, but her voice had that brittle edge, that sharpness that comes from panic barely masked as amusement. I tilted my head and smiled like I'd just forgotten myself. "Oh, I'm sorry, I just assumed he told you. About Miami, the sushi place? Your little photo shoot in his bed? But hey, who am I to ruin a perfectly good celebration?" There was no recovering from that. Not really. Jason didn't say anything. He just walked out of the room without looking at either of us, and Melanie stood there, frozen, as whispers erupted like wildfire around her. I didn't stay to watch the aftermath. I'd already lit the match. I didn't need to stand in the ashes. But as I stepped outside and felt the sunlight hit my face, there was no relief, no wash of satisfaction. Just a strange, heavy quiet. Because the truth is, revenge isn't clean. It doesn't wipe the slate or make the betrayal sting less. It just gives you the illusion of control, the sense that you've taken something back, even if all you've really done is trade your pain for theirs. That evening, as I poured myself a glass of wine and ignored the dozens of missed calls from my mother, I got a single message from Melanie. No explanation, no denial, no apology, just one sentence. "I did what I had to do, and you don't even know to the half of it." I stared at the screen for a long time, rereading those words, over and over, wondering what she meant, wondering if maybe, just maybe, I hadn't burned down her world at all, but had only pulled back the curtain on something much darker. And that's when I realized something truly terrifying. The war wasn't over. It hadn't even begun. In the wake of the bridal shower debacle, the days that followed unfolded like the slow, sickening aftermath of a natural disaster, quiet on the surface, yet humming with the tremors of something irreversibly damaged beneath. My phone barely stopped vibrating for 3 straight days, an endless stream of furious messages from my mother demanding explanations, from Jason oscillating between wounded confusion and clipped accusations, and even a few unknown numbers I could only assume belonged to Melanie's friends or possibly even her lawyer. I didn't respond to most of them, not out of cowardice or defiance, but because I had reached a point of emotional saturation where words no longer seemed capable of containing the mess I'd unleashed. I had exposed a lie, yes, but in doing so, I had unearthed something far more complicated, something that couldn't be neatly tied up with an apology or even a confession. Jason finally showed up at my apartment 4 days after the shower, unannounced and visibly thinner, his usual casual charm replaced by a haunted quiet. He stood in the doorway with a manila envelope clutched in his hand, his fingers white from the pressure, and asked if he could come in. I let him, partly because I still loved him, deeply and fiercely in that older sister way. That feels more like guardianship than affection, and partly because I knew this conversation had been circling us like a storm, and it was time, finally, to let it make landfall. He didn't sit. He didn't even remove his coat. He just stood there staring at me with a look I had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not betrayal, but something closer to exhaustion, like a man who'd spent days walking in circles through a forest that looked the same from every angle. "She's pregnant," he said, the words heavy and final, like a stone dropped into water. She says it's mine. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. But I took your advice, he continued, lifting the envelope slightly. I told her we needed a DNA test. I said we needed to be sure. I haven't opened it yet. He handed it to me, and for a moment I thought he wanted me to read it aloud, but then he shook his head. I can't, he said simply. If it's mine, I don't know what I'll do, but if it's not, if it's Ben's, I'm afraid I'll do something I can't take back. The room fell silent, both of us held hostage by the weight of that unknown truth sealed inside a thin paper veil. I didn't open it either. I placed it on the table between us like a landmine and poured us each a glass of water, which neither of us touched. We sat like that for a long time, him staring at the envelope, me staring at him, both of us realizing that the truth, whatever it was, wouldn't actually fix anything. It wouldn't undo the betrayal or make Melanie innocent or me vindicated. It wouldn't restore trust or rewrite the timeline or bring back the version of Jason who still believed in unconditional love. It would just be another detail, another brutal fact to be folded into an already unbearable reality. Eventually he left, still carrying the envelope, still uncertain, and I let him go without trying to convince him otherwise. Sometimes people need to carry their pain with them a little longer before they're ready to put it down. That night, I sat on my balcony, wrapped in an old sweater and nursing a drink that had gone warm, and tried to decide whether I felt victorious or ruined. I had done what I set out to do. I had exposed Melanie, torn her mask off in front of everyone, and forced Jason to see the cracks in the fairy tale. But I didn't feel any better. I felt tired. I felt older. I felt like I had traded one kind of heartbreak for another. And then, just as I was about to go inside, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number, no name, no context, just 6 words that knocked the air out of my lungs. He never told you the truth. I stared at it for what felt like forever, the words blurring and sharpening again as my mind raced through every possible meaning. Who was he? Ben? Jason? My father, even? And what truth? What could still be left in the shadows after everything had already come to light? I didn't respond. I didn't want to. I knew if I asked the question, I would be pulled back in, sucked into another layer of secrets and lies and half-answers that I wasn't sure I had the strength to endure. Instead, I reached for the envelope Jason had left behind. Yes, he had left it after all, quietly slipping it onto my bookshelf on his way out, and I held it in my hands for a long moment before I walked it out to the fire escape and set it alight with a match. I watched as the flame took hold, slow at first, then fast and hungry, devouring the truth I had fought so hard to uncover. And as the ash crumbled away into the night air, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not peace, not closure, but a kind of grim acceptance. Because maybe that's the real end to every story like this. Not justice, not clarity, but silence. The absence of noise. The soft, stubborn refusal to let other people's poison live rent-free in your head. I don't know if the baby was Jason's or Ben's. I don't know who sent the message or what truth still waits for me in the shadows. All I know is that some questions don't deserve answers. Some envelopes are better burned than opened, and some truths, no matter how long they've waited in the dark, are better left there. Because at the end of the day, knowing everything doesn't make you free. Sometimes it just makes you bleed slower.